Hello dear rock and metal musicians, I'm Mike Trubetsko from EOL Studios and I'm also a member of Mix Review Crew. And today I wanted to discuss why people may be cautious of a music producer. Now this topic may sound a bit funny to you, and it certainly was the case for myself as well when I first started in the music industry. However, over time I realized that there are certain reasons for this idea to exist in musicians' heads, and in this video I want to break down the reasons for this image to appear and discuss how we as music producers in the modern metal industry should behave, should work, and should interact with you musicians in order to prevent this happening and change it for better. So let's start with this idea: why people are cautious of a music producer. When I first started in the music industry, I was really excited and passionate about being a music producer, and obviously I still am. But I was also a little bit naive. When I was coming to the gigs and networking with musicians, I was like, oh, I'm a metal music producer, and I was anticipating a reaction of certain kinds, such as, oh, cool, how do you, work? What do you do for making the guitars or bass or drums stand out? All those little things we're so passionate about. But instead, in certain cases, the reaction that I received was, you're a music producer, be right back. And so they fled into an eternal abyss, and I could never justify why this happened. Now, over time my experience grew, and I started to understand what may be the reasons beyond such an anticipation and such a reception of a music producer. And here I want to list those reasons for you to probably break it down and understand better how this image occurs in your head, and then I'll explain what should we do in order to avoid it and change for better. So the first image that comes to my mind is an old school greedy music producer. Those species existed back in the day, in 70s, 80s, maybe 90s, when the music industry was in a very, very different state to what it is nowadays. Thing is, back in the day, you pretty much could not afford any gear because it was so expensive. The technology was not as good as today. And the only way to record yourself was to get a label deal, a contract, which would fund you into the studio and with a producer. So the producer was the one who fully ruled that show, and he or she pretty much was able to do anything with musicians. And, all of us heard those stories of slave labor contracts musicians has been signed for just to get that recording going, and they were pretty much bound with that agreement for their lives, for their full careers, and such. And obviously long gone are those days when such producers existed, but we still somehow think that this is one of the most feasible image appearing in our heads when we hear a word of music producer. And potentially this happens just because we all watched those documentaries, movies, or TV series depicting that. The second image that comes into my head when we're talking about music producer, which can negatively impact musicians' lives, is a modern electronic fancy producer, pretty much a DJ. Now, it's really important to understand what is the difference between the role of a producer in certain genre, because in electronic music, a producer would be the person who is making beats, making samples, putting together electronic layers, and producing, so making music. It is really different from the roles of a producer in a metal industry, on which I will elaborate further on in this video. And now the third type of a producer, which can potentially negatively impact your life, is a big producer with even bigger ego. Such producers do exist these days. Such producers are normally high achievers with certain nominations or awards in the industry, and this provides them with some certain power which can negatively affect the interaction between them and musicians. I have witnessed certain horror stories when a big producer have changed the musician's material to his or her liking, but not to the band's liking. And he just went with that because of the ego, because of the ambitions, because of the achievements. But obviously the band was very much dissatisfied with that. And I won't dive too long into a debate between professionalism and ego, and when we should say no, we should carry on with our own ideas or open up to the bands. But in my opinion, this is pretty much unacceptable, at least in my career. So let's now talk about what a producer should actually do to not come across sleazy, salesy, or disruptive to your material. A professional rock and metal producer comes as a supervisor to your musical desires, not his own. The real duty is to understand what does work and what does not work within the context of your material, and advise based on that, experiment and find the best solutions to the ideas given. And sometimes bands want something which just is not applicable to the particular material, or they just are not that experienced. But the job of a producer would be to frame it or angle it differently to actually make this idea work in the context of the material. And it's a little bit, if not much more, hard work rather than just slapping own template of music ideas and just going with them and making everything sound similar. But in my opinion, it's a duty of service no one can neglect. Another duty of a modern rock and metal producer is the organizational role, which is management, budgeting, studio choice, helping in organization of the recording process entirely, advising what is achievable and what is not achievable within the band's budget, and coming around some certain solutions to tame this down. For example, if the budget is really limited, some aspects can be partially DIY recorded in the certain studios, and if done correctly, it won't sound as bad. Or mixing and mastering can be outsourced elsewhere where prices are lower. The most important goal of a modern rock and metal producer is to serve as an objective ear for the musician's material and put an overall sonic vision into a cohesive product on each production stage, whether it is pre-production, tracking, mixing, production, all of that. And finally, a producer works as a psychologist in the studio and helps you as a musician to squeeze best takes out of your performance, consider things differently, try picking the guitar on a different angle, or try playing, certain feels for the drums which suit the song nicely. Pretty much an objective ear with a different perspective, helping you tie together your songs. So, guys and gals, hopefully I have explained why you may be cautious of a music producer and what a professional music producer should do in order to avoid for you to feel cautious about him or herself. And please let me know if you think that a producer fulfilling those roles is much better for your needs. Thank you.